Do you have a 2005 to 2009 Mustang? And do you have people who ride in the back? Then you might want to consider building one of these. Watch as I modify my 2007 Mustang center console to add in rear seat cup holders. In this two-part series, I lay out all the materials, measurements, and tips to inspire you to build one for yourself. In part 1, I removed the console and drew the rough outline of the work, making measurements and cuts, adding a panel and brackets to hold the cup holder in place. In part 2, I make more cuts and shape fiberglass sections to the back of the console, finishing off the area with some body filler before adding the finishing touches to make this console look and function better than stock. You can take the build as far as you want, so please watch and enjoy. Thank you. Hi everyone! At the end of part 1 of this build on my 2007 Mustang, I fabricated some brackets in my center console to hold my cup holder in place. I set the console in the car and checked the fitment and operation of the cup holder. If you're just joining this build, be sure to check out part 1 to see how I got to this point. For everyone else, let's move on forward. So now that the console is temporarily in the car, you could just leave the cup holder assembly down, trim the console edges a bit, use some U-shaped rubber edge trim for the sides, and call it a day. I decided to cut out the entire back area and fiberglassing in a panel which I intend to paint. Hey, it may look horrible when it's done, but it's got functional cup holders now. So let's get to work. So here's a rough layout of the shape I'm thinking of using some cardboard as a template. I wanted to make a curved fiberglass section that ties in the console to where the cup holder rests so it looks more finished. I plan on adhering the fiberglass to the inside and outside edges of the console and may have to add a few support pieces for strength. But first I have to get it together and see how it works. I measured out 29 inches from the front of the console to the back, then measured 19 inches from the bottom of the console to the top, made a slight curve, and then marked 1 inch down from the top of the console. Again with the safety glasses on and the Dremel, time to do some more cuts. Now you can see that the cup holder has room to expand to hold that massive fountain drink that my daughter probably shouldn't be drinking. The cardboard template showing how it would meet the cup holder. So with a little painter's tape, actually a lot, and some cardboard, I roughed out the shape I had in mind. I was curious to see that if I could shape out the fiberglass sides to meet the cup holder area, I then could take advantage of the factory mounting tabs that are on the cup holder. I also need to leave a little room on the bottom where the bottom of the cup holder door needs to clear when opening and closing. Fitting the console back in the car once again, you can see the shape I'm after. Now that the cup holder is attached, it has room to clear the seat when opened, and that it sits nicely so that you can reach it easily without banging your legs into the holders. In part 1, you saw that to attach the cup holder to the console, I made a bottom support bracket with riv nuts and screws, and I made a bracket with 2 screws and riv nuts for the top support. I also had to make a cutout in the storage area for where the cup holder tension spring resides. Here's how I plan to tackle covering all that up. Using some cardboard, I made a template that will be used to cover up the rib nut and screws. Rough measurements are 8 5/16 inches wide by 4 1/4 inches tall on the sides and 5 1/4 inches tall in the middle, with 1 inch cutouts in the top corners. The middle part I intend to bend around the top bar holding the rib nuts, so when the screws are tightened, it will pull the panel in and be held into place without any visible screws or holes. Transferring my measurements over to some 22 gauge sheet metal, I started to trim up the panel. This would be a great time to have some fun with a bead roller, but I don't have one. I intend to cover the panel with some textured paint, but you could easily use some vinyl or leather fabric. In fact, you could wrap the entire console in a cool distressed leather or slick vinyl. Don't let me using paint stop your creativity. With the panel cut to fit, I place it inside, and you can see how it tucks in nicely and meets the lower bolt holes where the console attaches to the transmission tunnel. I intentionally left the upper middle section tall so that I can trim it down and bend it to fit over the top metal support bar. Measuring just about 3/4 inches from the top, I can now make the bend. Using the vise and metal hammer, you can easily shape this and get it flat. I put in the extra bar stock used for making the support bar into the vise and use that to shape the metal panel around it so it would fit nice and snug. With the top of the panel shaped, let's see how it fits. First, I tighten down the screws for the lower cup holder support bracket. Now, placing the panel in, I slightly press it down over the top bar. Going towards the front of the cup holder, I tighten the top screws that are going into the rib nuts on the support bar. The panel now hides all the holes and screws, and the top bar supports the upper part of the console assembly. I left a little gap in case I decided to use a vinyl fabric on the panel, but we'll see about that later on. The cup holder is now in use, with the panel in place with no interference from the tension spring from the cup holder. It's time for some fiberglass. I made some cardboard support structures so I can make a shape for the fiberglass to adhere to. I am making the bottom edge long on purpose so I can trim it to fit the transmission tunnel. I do need to shave these 3 little parts on the top edge of the console, so once again with the safety glasses and Dremel, I made a few quick passes and now we are ready to go. I started out with layering the 2 bottom pieces first and mixing the resin in small amounts. I found that 2 ounces was just enough to do this first part of the project. I intentionally left the outer edges where the cup holder meets longer so I could trim them to fit, as well as the bottom edge of the console. I made sure to have at least 1 inch of overlap on the sides and the top of the console as well. Once the resin is mixed, the fiberglass gets pretty smelly and sticky, so disposable gloves are a good idea here, as well as having lots of ventilation and even a respirator if you have one, especially if you have respiratory issues. I also added the top part of the fiberglass mat onto the console, worked out the areas with a small spreader, and left the console to dry. This is smelly stuff, so be sure to work in a well-ventilated space and give it time to cure. The fiberglass kit I am using is made by 3M, number 420. It's an 8-ounce kit that costs about $25. It has the resin, hardener, 3 square feet of fiberglass, a small spreader, a small mixing tray, and a wood stirrer. You should have just enough fiberglass for this project. You will need to get some small cheap brushes at the dollar store or hardware store to help with the application of the fiberglass. I didn't use any release agent like Vaseline on the cardboard because, well, I forgot to do so. But because this is a learning experience and not having tons of cash into this project, the worst case scenario is that I could do this fiberglass part all over again and it wouldn't be the end of the world. The next day, I applied a second fiberglass covering on the top, this time covering just a little bit more with overlap. Same process as before, using gloves in a well-ventilated area, mixing the resin in small amounts and covering the fiberglass well, and using the spreader and brushes to work all the resin into the fiberglass mat. I left the console to dry. So here's the cup holder temporarily placed back into the fiberglass back. I have the transmission hump cut out to fit. The top section is nice and smoothed out. All still roughly trimmed, and you can see the cup holder now opens nicely with lots of room. What I am going to do now is build up the outside edges with fiberglass to cover up the upper tabs and the side supports of the cup holder. Using a tape measure, I made a small template with cardboard and painter's tape to make a teardrop shape that will fade into the sides. I approached this task by taking a piece of fiberglass, lay it down, add some resin, and soaked it well, and then folded it over and back and let the resin seep in, filling in the edges and smoothing it out. With the sides done, you can see how they are flared out, all still rough, and now I need to make a top flare and 2 bottom ones. Using about a half a tablespoon of resin, I painted the area first, then laid in the fiberglass. I folded it over like I was making cherry turnovers, and I brushed it down. I then put a small piece of cardboard over the opening at the same height of the sides, and I put a plastic spoon on top of it to keep the flare in place. With the top and the sides dried, I used some little scrap pieces of fiberglass to round out and strengthen the edges. I need to leave the bottom open because of the movement of the cup holder assembly when it opens and closes. Using another half a tablespoon of resin, lay the fiberglass down, brush it down with the resin, repeat again and again and again. Now that I have the back space all shaped out, I'm going to use the remaining fiberglass to strengthen the inside areas and the bottom support. It finally stopped raining and it's 65 degrees outside, so best work with some fresh air. Adding the fiberglass to the sides and painting them into place alongside the console. The smaller brushes I got at the dollar store really worked well at getting into those tight places. I'm not too concerned with the cardboard still being in there. Originally the idea was to remove it, but I messed that part up on the front end. But in the end, it still will be pretty strong, just not as pro level when looking underneath. I left the console out to dry for a few hours, and now I need to do a quick trim and sanding and get ready for some body filler. The filler I'm using is another 3M product, number 310, which is a 12-ounce kit that comes with the hardener. I put on a quick coat just to get the shape set, and it becomes pretty rigid after 2 light coats. Here you can see with some quick sanding and fitting the cup holder in place to verify movement. I have some light sanding to do in the door area to make it close properly. I did a quick paint in black just to check the edging and contours of the shape of how it would look finished. I then did a quick spray with my initial choice of bed liner and was disappointed in the results. It was really runny, and it didn't do anything for adding a texture that I would need, so I won't mention the name because I wouldn't recommend this product. It probably works well for its intended use, but this project isn't that. So, seeing how the texture surface of the console meets the body filler I have, I decided to run filler all the way down the sides of the console, so when I add the final spray of a different bed liner, it will look uniform. So adding some primer as a guide coat, I did a quick sand with some 120 grit paper. I added 2 coats of body filler down the sides and did a rough sanding with some 120 grit paper. I then followed up with some 220 grit and did a quick coat of primer. The end result? Well, look at that. This bed liner spray worked awesome. This console looks so slick, almost OEM in appearance. This is the Herculiner Do-It-Yourself Bed Liner Spray, number HALB 15 in black. It's a 15-ounce can, and I used the whole thing for about 8 coats. I still need to do some touch-up spray on the cup holder door using some black interior paint from Rainbow Industries that I used on my '68 Mustang. Now that the paint is dry on the cup holder, it is time to attach the bottom bracket. You need to do this first because once you screw in the top bolts, you won't be able to get to the bottom screws because they are covered up with the panel. I painted the inside panel with bed liner too, and now setting it inside the console, I locked it down and made sure everything fits and works as intended. Placing the top piece on the console for a quick cleaning and arm roll, it's time to get ready to put everything back in the car. First, plug in the cigarette lighter, and then place the console in the car and attach the 2 7mm front screws first. Then insert the 2 sidekick panels, which just slide in and lock in place. Then install the 2 10mm nuts in the rear storage section of the console. Then place the top piece of this console in, which snaps into place, and the 2 screws that hold it in back. Now that it's in, it's all ready for my daughter to use and enjoy. You may have noticed that I changed out the interior in the meantime, which I did using a TMI Sport R500 kit. My front seat foam and cloth were worn to the frame, so it was time to do a refresh for myself. Now that it's done, I am super pleased with the results, and my daughter was so excited too when I took her to school the next day. A win-win, lots of work, and I learned some things along the way. That's why I work on my cars. I hope you enjoyed watching, and maybe inspired you to make one of your own. Now off to finish my T5 swap on my '68 Mustang, which nobody cares to see. Or do you? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.